We are less than a month away from spring training. Whether the Guardians make another move or not, Stephen Vogt is going to have a lot on his plate in year 3 after the first 2 successful years at the helm. Let's get into it.
Tanner Bibee, the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Guardians fans? Hope you've been staying warm. I know it's not the easiest thing about baseball right now, but I promise you, in less than a month, we'll be talking about actual spring training and not just theorizing it. Welcome on another episode of Locked On Guardians, our favorite half hour of the day. Hope it's your favorite half hour of the day as well, because it's the only podcast that covers your Cleveland Guardians every day, from the majors, the minors, the draft, and everything in between. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the number one sports podcast network. Thanks to you. I'm Justin Lada, one of your 2 co-hosts. If you are new here, if you're coming back, thanks to the everydayers, all the insiders, and all of the commenters and listeners. Been hosting the show with my friend and co-host Jeff Ellis for the last 4 years, who's off today, and I've been covering the Guardians minor league system going into my 20th year doing that as a prospect writer and editor. And I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Guardians your first listen today and every day, wherever it is you get podcasts. Wouldn't be able to do this without you guys every day. It would not be as enjoyable without all of you tuning in to talk Guardians. The faithful that I know comments every day that says, I know Anthony always comments every day saying, don't know what I do without the podcast, because nobody else is talking Guardians right now, and I'm sure nobody else is today too, except for our friends over at the Selvius podcast. That's roughly about it these days. On today's show, we're going to get into what positions should be up for competition in spring training, how that's going to affect the roster, and Stephen Vogt. Also going to get into what the identity of the team might look like and that importance. We're starting off today with something I've been thinking about for a few months now. How does Stephen Vogt follow up his first 2 years as the Guardians manager? How do you follow up the first 2 years of your managerial career? Remember, Stephen Vogt had 1 season in Seattle where he was the bullpen and quality control coach. Comes to Cleveland, following up Terry Francona, who had a great run here, multiple playoff appearances, multiple division titles, a World Series appearance, also had 2 Manager of the Year awards himself. And then Stephen Vogt comes in 2024 and, first 2 years, 2 division titles, 2 Manager of the Year awards. And the Manager of the Year award, we know, is subjected. It's subjective. It always depends on everyone's frame of thought going into the year, right? And I think last year's the first time it really felt like a manager got that award, despite the expectations being they should be a division contender, right? Because everybody should assume the Guardians, because they won in 2024 and got to the ALCS, should be contending for the division title once again, right? But then we saw the cluster that unfolded, and they had to make a spectacular run in September to get back into it. And obviously took a collapse from Detroit as well to fall into the wild card, which ended up, being fine for them and not as good for the Guardians. But you'll take a division title every single year. At least I will. So how do you follow that up? What does that do for expectations for the team and for Stephen Vogt? Because can you win a Manager of the Year award for a 3rd straight year? I don't know if that's actually happened. Comment if you have any idea if that's ever happened before. I know that's a relatively newish award, but it's hard to say Stephen Vogt hasn't done a good job despite the challenges he's faced here. It hasn't been an easy first 2 years, if you haven't noticed. And it was always like to ask to how much does a manager influence the game, right? He puts the lineup together. He decides who's available in the bullpen, who to go to, and what situations, pitch hitting, any other, defensive substitutions. Those are the small parts of the area he impacts the game while it's going on. Most of the work is done behind the scenes. And I think that's where Stephen Vogt's done his best work. And I think he's going to have a lot to draw. It doesn't mean he's not going to have challenges this year. But what are the expectations for him going into season 3? Like, what do you say to the team in spring training that you've won 2 straight division titles with? The roster is still very young. There's a lot of positions up for grab, which we're going to talk about. And they need to find an identity, which they're going to talk about too. And I'm guessing Stephen Vogt's thinking about that right now as they get ready to head to Arizona, or at least the players are heading to report probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks. The first year wasn't easy. right? Shane Bieber had a great first 2 seasons, and that was the end of his career as pitching for the Guardians. Unfortunately, he had Tommy John, never pitched for them again, never came back last year for them. That rotation in 2024 was broken all year. It was Tanner Bibee, Ben Lively saved them. And after that, it was a mess. The bullpen obviously was great, overshadowed everything. The offense was good, not great, but they managed to get to the ALCS despite all of that, right? And then you have this terrible start in 2025. Defensively, they were bad. The pitching was not figuring it out. The bullpen was a little bit leaky. The offense was streaky. And then they never really got things on track. They had, some stop and start momentum throughout the year. And then you had the Clase and Ortiz situation, right? So the two biggest things that have happened to the Guardians were sort of not, they were player related, but not playing, like performance related. It was injury for Shane Bieber, which was a major emotional blow for the team. And then last year, the Clase and Ortiz situation, which took away a big chunk of the rotation, someone you were counting on, and then obviously a Hall of Fame track closer. And in 2026, there's still going to be a very young team, right? You're going to have a lot of young players across the board. You're still going to have the second full year for a guy like Manzardo. You're going to have other young players competing for playing time, guys who haven't quite established themselves. You're going to have questions this year going to spring training. What is Steven Kwan's future? He's 2 years away from free agency. There were trade talks last year with him at the deadline that seemed legitimate. The Guardians just never got the right offer, which I'm not surprised by, given how he was playing and the situation they were in. You're going to have more of that this year. If the Guardians are mediocre at best, close to the deadline, you're going to be answering those questions all year long. That's going to be tough for Kwan. That's going to be tough for Stephen Vogt. For Kwan himself, he needs a good full season. That's a lot on him. But Stephen Vogt's the guy that's going to have to, talk about those things. He needs Kwan to be good. Kwan needs Kwan to be good. The team needs Kwan to be good. But you're going to be answering those questions all year long, because I don't think in 2027, no matter how many games we play in the Major League Baseball season, I don't think Steven Kwan's playing for this team. Even though we've said before, and I would say it again, I think the best path for the Guardians and Steven Kwan is to let him play out his contract and let him go to free agency after 2027. The other issues Vogt's going to deal with right away in spring training is finding a lineup, obviously, and developing this core around Jose Ramirez, who, by the way, is going to be the World Baseball Classic. So that's a new concern and challenge in spring training. I'll talk more about that in the third segment. But Jose Ramirez is not going to be with the team in spring training. You got to deal with him playing high-intensity games right off the bat in the World Baseball Classic, which, as much as I love the World Baseball Classic itself, we're all going to be holding our breath every time Jose is doing something on that field, right? Logan Allen is also pitching for Team Panama. I think is something we've overlooked too that's going to challenge Vogt this year. He lost Craig Albarnez, his best friend in baseball, and his right-hand man for the first 2 years here. He relied on Craig Albarnez a ton early on, just to have his back, to push him, to bounce ideas off of, to trust somebody every single day. He's gone to Baltimore now. I had to replace him. Lose Kai Correa, who was a huge influence on this team defensively. That's a big loss. Came very close to losing one of the assistant pitching coaches over the offseason, it sounds like. And I don't know if they'll be able to keep him much longer, depending on how much longer Carl Willis wants to hang around. Plus, you got, Corey Kluber, who also, wants to keep working, and you're not going to say no to Corey Kluber. So he's going to have new faces on the pitching staff, in addition to young players. Expectations following the first 2 years, because what have we always said? Expectation is a thief of joy. I don't know if anybody expected the Guardians to do what they did in 2024, especially in the postseason. And then 2025, of course, we did expect them to do it again, and they struggled until the very end of the year. And then the playoffs came, they didn't really deliver there. And I can't really blame Stephen Vogt for any of that. But it is up to him. The roster, barring whether or not the Guardians make a move the rest of the offseason at this point, which I got to be honest, I'm kind of losing hope that they're going to do anything. Even Austin Hayes at this point. It's going to be Vogt's challenge to help this team find the identity. This team, every new team, every year finds a new identity. It's something Terry Francona always talked about. Every year is different. Maybe some of the players are the same, but things are different, and you've got to find that identity. And that's up to the players, but it's also up to Vogt to help them find it and run with it, because that's what's going to help you take off and win these games. Speaking of a team's identity, whether or not the Guardians do make some kind of move the rest of the offseason, that is an area that isn't quite clear, as I just mentioned, and we're going to discuss that next. It is a new year. You know what that means? It is tax time. But tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to hand things off and move throughout your day. TurboTax full service. You're going to get your taxes done for you by a local expert start to finish. That's going to save you the stress or guesswork over filing taxes. It's going to handle all the things you normally have to do. W-2, self-employed forms. It's going to help you work to get every deduction. I know as someone who has multiple gigs, multiple jobs, has used TurboTax before. I work from home, so I need to get every deduction that I can. I've got multiple 1099s I got to figure out. It can be confusing, and that's why I trust TurboTax to get mine done, and it's easier when you're getting it done by a local expert. For a little bit of time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in. If a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year, just filed by February 28th. That's coming up real soon. Take taxes off your plate. Get back to real life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. As always, thank all of you for being here and hanging out and talking Cleveland Guardians baseball with us every single day. And thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Couldn't do it without you. We love being here every day. If you already live your team, your Cleveland Guardians every day, take it up a level. Go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club. Get Locked On Guardians with no interruptions, members only Discord access, and more for $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to LockedOnGuardians.com/supercast, .supercast.com, I should say, or check the link in the show notes to learn more. So after 2020, what was it, 2019, actually, probably 2018, even though the 2019 Guardians won, or I should say the Indians, in 2019 won 93 games, missed the playoffs, which, by the way, was the second time in franchise history that they won 93 games and missed the playoffs. The other time was 2005. I think I mentioned that recently because I do love that 2005 team. But after that year, after 2018, essentially the last division title before 2022, they transitioned away from that core that was, Jose and, it took them till 2022 to find kind of a new identity. 2020 they made the playoffs. That was after a bunch of trades, right? The Mike Clevenger trade really significantly changed the face of that roster. You still had Lindor, but a lot of other guys have been gone. And you had to find a new identity, a new core going forward, right? So 2020 happened. 2021 was, one of the worst years they've had in a while. And then there was that small ball group with Tito, right? In 2022, you had Ahmed and Kwan emerging, and Miles Straw was full time. That was Andres Jimenez's peak. Hasn't been close to that since. 2024, was still the same, right? It was still the same kind of identity. You didn't have Ahmed anymore, but you had, Kwan was still here, Jimenez was still here. You had Jose. You transitioned to some other guys on the roster, though. You had Josh Naylor as that last part of that core. But you had sort of a team that had been together for a while. The pieces were more consistent, and you sort of had that identity, right? It was a team that always came back late in games, that got on base, that ran the bases very well. They did all those things really well offensively. And obviously they had a really great bullpen, historically great bullpen, and a tattered rotation for the most part, except for, again, Bibee and Lively. Last year, was a different story, which, by the way, I think is, a testament, again, to Stephen Vogt and these players. And, again, Detroit struggling down the stretch, but the Guardians can only play who they played in front of them, and they did great. But it was a bottom 5 offense for the season. The rotation really wasn't clicking until September, which ironically was, long after Ortiz was banned. The bullpen was solid, but obviously, didn't have Class A, and it had some cracks, right? Maybe that whole situation galvanized them a little. The defense obviously was good, as Jeff is talking about. The rotation obviously stepped up. The 6-man rotation worked, which, by the way, is not going to happen out of the gate. Again, I think I've explained that before. You're not going to get a 6-man rotation to start 2026, and at best you can only do it in September because of the extra players you can call up and some off days. It does not work early in the season with off days, possible rainouts, roster limits, all that kind of stuff. But the big thing the Guardians are going to face this year, I talked about the challenges Vogt, what awaits him in year 3, is finding the team's identity. Biggest piece for the Guardians is figuring out what you're building your identity around, right? You have to figure out, okay, offensively, what are they going to be? Because if you look at this lineup, you've got Steven Kwan, who obviously gets on base and can run, good defender, right? All around good player. Nobody has any clue who's hitting second at this point. Not that it really matters specifically here, but you've still got to find someone to hit in front of Ramirez, hopefully be on base in front of him. And by the way, Kwan needs a good full season, not just 2 or 3 months. You got to find someone to protect Jose. Is that Manzardo? You've got guys like DeLauter emerging for playing time. No idea what the middle infield combo is going to look like. No idea what 2/3 of the outfield is going to look like. And I look at this roster. I don't see the guys that run first to third, right? I don't see the Ahmed Rosarios, the Andres Jimenez, the Miles Straws. That was their identity. I know it, was it sustainable? Was it great? No, obviously not. It was very unpredictable and dependent on a lot of batted ball luck. You didn't have a ton of power, and this team still doesn't have a ton of power when I look at it. On paper, it could be a solid lineup, could be. And, I'm putting a lot of emphasis and a lot of heavy lifting on could. But look, I don't know what the team's identity is. Brian Rocchio is not a great runner. Bo Naylor is just okay. Kafis isn't great. Like, this is not a team that runs the bases well. It's not a team, at least speed's not going to be their identity. They're not a team it's a lot of power. So those are 2 key things you don't really have. What is their identity going to be as offense? I think that means the identity of the team has to be its starting pitching, right? You have to, that's what the team has to be built around, is the starting rotation, which it could be very good on paper. Again, Gavin, a lot of people think he was a Cy Young dark horse last year. Could be this year. Tanner Bibee, by all accounts, is looking ahead to a really good year, improved year from last year, working on some stuff, really got things out of the way in September. Cecconi, we need to see if he can back up, what he did last year, that the metrics say was unsustainable. Logan Allen's been solid. He was solid last year. Joey Cantillo really emerged. I talked about him in an earlier episode, how excited I am for him. Kate Smith's going to be the closer for a full year. It's a deep bullpen, but, at least in depth, but it's got a lot of questions, right? Got 35-year-old Sean Armstrong, who I'm confident about, but, Father Time's undefeated. And you got 2 lefties who can't throw strikes. And Sobrowski's got injury issues. Confessed to do what he did last year. You got 3 bullpen spots up for, Connor Brogdon and Peyton Pallette, who's a Rule 5 pick. And I'm going to talk more about this in the next segment. But the point is, the identity to me is the rotation would be the identity last year was drawing walks, right? It was patience. If you're not going to be able to run the bases very well or hit for a lot of power, you got to get guys on base. You got to get the big hit when guys are on base. I don't know that we're going to see that from this group, but they need patience. They're going to have to draw walks. Like Kwan works the count very well, right? Jose, we know, works the count. We'll take his walks. Chase DeLauter, by all accounts, has been a patient hitter, but it's going to be, at some point, if he's healthy, his first full year in the big leagues. Bo Naylor can take a walk. Nobody wants to hear this, but Nolan Jones, that's his main skill, is drawing walks. He hits the crap out of the ball in terms of exit velocity, but that's about it. But he draws walks. Daniel Sheeman had been good at drawing walks, and Juan Brito has shown the ability to draw walks in the minors. We have no guarantee that's going to happen in the majors, but that's part of his identity as a hitter, is patience and being able to pull the ball in the air. I think that's the biggest challenge, is figuring out what can this team rely on offensively. Like, they were great at sack flies last year. Well, that requires getting guys to third base with less than 2 outs and not striking out. There are some guys in the lineup who are going to strike out. Manzardo is going to strike out. DeLauter is going to strike out. Arias strikes out a ton. Kafis strikes out. Bo Naylor strikes out. Nolan Jones strikes out. A lot of guys in this lineup strike out. You're going to have to walk out, even bats. This is a team, I think, as currently constructed, has to grind pitchers into the ground by taking a lot of pitches. It's very important for this team to find its identity. I think that's going to be a challenge for Vogt and this team as it's currently constructed going into 2026. And who will those pieces be? We're going to take a look at who potential spots on the roster, which are up for grabs here in just a moment. Well, I know the offseason is winding down, but whatever happens the rest of the way, heading into spring training, we'll have a lot more content for you. But make sure you hit the bell on YouTube to get all the Guardians news whenever there is news. We will have a reaction video up on YouTube as soon as possible. We'll have an episode out for you on that too. And if you hit the bell on YouTube, you'll be notified of those things set right to your phone or your computer. And if you auto download on all your favorite audio platforms, we are literally free ever. We can't be missed. If we're not on a certain platform, let us know. I'm sure we'll get on there. But that's the best way for you to keep up with the show, support the show, because you can take us with you wherever you go. Talk Guardians baseball. Even when it feels like negative 15 out, we're talking Guardians baseball. And even if you're at the gym, driving to work, hopefully that makes you feel a little bit warmer. I certainly could use that these days. So hope for a lot of fun for that ahead. All right. Let's talk about the roster and who is locked in and what spots are up for grabs, because that, again, is going to also be a challenge for Vogt, and it's going to set the team's identity. I mean, it's going to the identity is going to be organic. They're going to take it on themselves. Hopefully they find one sooner than later, but finding the right pieces is going to be important, because again, that's why I'm still all in. I shouldn't say all in, but I'm still, trying to hit the bell to trade for a Brendan Donovan, or, I don't think Nico Horner is being moved at this point. Even an Austin Hayes. Like, this is a team that needs to squeeze every ounce of all 26 players on its rosters to succeed. So the identity's got to be pretty identified. I don't know if that's the right way to. They've got to figure the identity of the team out. They got to know what they can fall back on when times get tough. As a pitching, defense, how they score runs, however they do it, they have to know that's part of their identity as a team. So, I first talked about in the earlier segments about Jose Ramirez being in the World Baseball Classic for the Dominican Republic. That's going to be another challenge for Stephen Vogt. You're not going to have Jose in spring training the whole way through, and he's going to be holding his breath as much as we are when he plays in those games. But that means later down the season, that means getting Jose some rest, right? It means getting him more days off, which Jose doesn't like. Jose doesn't want to take days off, which is great. Sometimes that's to his own detriment. Maybe that's something, Vogt needs to figure out. But here's the problem with that is, if Jose takes the day off, how are you going to score runs? Because nobody else really knows. But we know Jose's locked in. We know Kwan is locked in, at least for the first few months. Bo Naylor, it's going to be his catching job. Manzardo is going to play first or DH. We know that. Hedges is on the bench. Fry has a role on this team. I think we're pretty much guaranteed that. It seems like all indications say that Brian Rocchio is going to be the shortstop based on the comments. Now, again, I always say, watch what they do, not what they say. And what they've said so far, it sounds like Rocchio is going to be given the chance again to play short, and Arias is going to be prepared to do other things. Who knows what that looks like? Then the rotation, you've got Williams, Bibee, and then Cantillo, I think, is a guarantee because of how well he pitched at the end of the year. Plus, he's out of options, so there's no reason for him to go anywhere else. So the rest of those other spots are up for grabs. We'll talk about that in a second. Then obviously you've got Cade Smith, you got Hunter Gaddis, Sean Armstrong, and Matt Festa, and then probably Connor Brogdon. I put Brogdon. I didn't put Brogdon here, but he is out of options. He does have a major league contract, so I would guess that he is a lock for the bullpen unless something really bad happens or somebody else beats him out. I don't know. I'd say it's not a lock, but I'd give it a 70% right now, going a month away from spring training. So that leaves us with center field and right field to be decided between Chase DeLauter, Angel Martinez. No one wants to hear this, but Nolan Jones is going to be in the mix. Daniel Schneeman, George Valera, CJ Kafis, maybe Jonathan Rodriguez. I don't know how it's going to work. And I've seen some people talk about manipulating Chase DeLauter's service time. I think that's the worst thing you can do, because should the Guardians really care about Chase DeLauter going to AAA to start the year? I know they can make excuses of him getting his feet under him and getting warmed up for the year and whatever else. I don't really care about Chase DeLauter's age 31 season. I don't even know if he's going to make it to 31. Let's say somehow Chase DeLauter for the next 2 or 3 years is healthy and plays over 100 games for the first time in his life. I don't know that age 28, 29, 30 Chase DeLauter is going to be able to do that. He might be able to do it now, but all these injuries, even if he recovers from them in the short term, the long term, they may take their toll. So in his later years, the injuries may build up on him. So I really don't care about Chase DeLauter's age 31 season. I would rather get his age 24 through 30 season. I don't care about that extra year. Maybe the Guardians do. I don't know. Maybe Jeff does. We'll see. Second base, we're talking about, and again, Martinez and Schneemann, I don't know if you need both on the bench, but those guys, again, you have to get everything out of your roster. What do they do to help the team? Martinez, it's mostly he does play. He doesn't really play good second base, I guess, or center field. He does run well. He does that. He hit lefties last year, but I don't know how sustainable that is. Schneemann is versatile. Those guys are mostly defensive players for their versatility, and Schneemann can draw a walk and has some pop. Valera, same thing with the injuries, right? I still shudder to think about DeLauter and Valera playing center field and right field next to each other in April here and wondering how they're both going to get to September, have enough gas left in the tank if this team somehow makes the playoffs, if they even get to the year healthy. Then there's Kafis, who, you want to get into the mix here. I don't really trust Rodriguez, but, it is what it is, and maybe you need somebody to balance out that lineup. Maybe David Fry plays some outfield, although it sounds like he's going to be playing a lot of catcher in spring training, which makes sense because he missed it all last year, and that's the best way to limit hedges offensively. So second base, you got Arias and Brito, and, we talked the other day about Brito deserving a shot, which I think he does, and I think you need to see it. I just think we've seen enough Gabriel Arias. I know Jeff said, about defense, and I agree. Like, defensively, the Guardians' best rotation or lineup is Arias at short and Rocchio at second. That's part of, how good they were in September. And I agree with that. But this team can't be another bottom 5 team offensively this year and expect to win. Like, how sustainable is that really? So I'm willing to see if they really are in on Rocchio again, to see him at short. We've seen enough of Arias. I don't think his approach is going to change at this point. I'm okay seeing Brito no matter what. Defensively, it's going to be bad, like we said the other day, but he's a switch hitter who I trust the numbers enough. I trust what I've seen enough in AAA for him to warrant a shot. I don't know if that's going to be out of spring training or not, but he would have been up last year if he wasn't hurt. So you've got your your backup infielders and 1, 2, 3, 4 outfielders for 2 spots, plus Kafis if you consider him an outfielder, and then Martinez who can bounce back and forth. I don't know how you fit Jones, Valera, and Kafis on the roster, especially if you keep DeLauter. I just don't know how it works. And that's going to be their challenge in spring training, is figuring out how to mix and match that. And you're not going to base decisions off spring training stats, but you're going to go with what makes the most sense for your roster. And I'm just looking at it on paper, and I don't know what makes the most sense. And the only thing I could think of is adding an Austin Hayes, but Rodriguez and then Jones don't fit to me. So I really don't know how it works out. I don't. As for the rotation, so Cecconi's got an option left. I've seen a lot of people asking what the rotation is going to look like. Cecconi has an option left. And, he did start a playoff game, but he was pulled pretty early, which, again, it was a decision we hashed at the end of the year last year. I don't want to go back there, but he's got an option left. And he didn't exactly, like, the numbers were good on the surface, but below the surface, there was a lot of questions. And I think it's fair to ask whether or not he can do that again. But he gets the leg up, I think, in the rotation in spring training, unless he completely falls apart and shows that he can't handle it and he needs to go to AAA and work on some things. And that leaves Allen and Messick. So both Allen and Messick have options. Messick has the least major league experience, but Logan Allen's going to be in the World Baseball Classic with Team Panama. So that's another arm that's out of the rotation in spring training for a little bit, forever, however long Panama lasts. And, Allen's competing for a rotation spot. I do fully expect Messick to go to AAA to be depth to start the year, but I don't think there's any guarantees with Cecconi, and who knows what happens with Allen in the World Baseball Classic. These things get tricky at times. And then in the bullpen, you've got Herron and Sabrowski, who both have control issues. Sabrowski's got injury history problems. You've got Peyton Powlett, who is a Rule 5 pick fighting for a job. Colin Holderman, has options, so he could start the year in AAA, but is a guy I think they do believe in. that they can fix and be a part of the bullpen. And then you've also got, I mentioned Brogdon, who I think probably has the leg up on the job just due to options. Then you've got guys like Andrew Walters, who are on the 40, Cody Hoyer, who was given a non-roster invitation, and then Pedro Avila as well. And don't be surprised if Colby Allard's added to the mix at some point too. I know he's not currently signed, but I would not be shocked if he re-signs with the Guardians coming into spring training. Because you just never know how guys are going to be healthy, especially with Logan Allen going to the World Baseball Classic. You need that depth, or somebody else loses an arm and he becomes valuable elsewhere. So don't be surprised to see him come back at some point too. The bullpen's going to be hard to figure out, but it's easily the one where you have the best, I think, run of options to go through. Figuring out that outfield is going to be a challenge, and then figuring out what fits best, because it might be easy enough to say who's the best player. And I agree. Like, you want to take your best 26 players north with you, but we also have to remember too, if we're talking about spring training here, that the roster that you see on March 28th, when games start, is not the roster you're going to see, September 28th or even August 28th or even July 28th. It's going to change. So you're trying to put your best foot forward to start the year. And maybe there's an argument for someone like Chase DeLauter not being on the roster for that reason, but I want to hear what that would be, because again, I don't care about his age 31 season, but you do want to have your best roster forward in April, because you can't win a division in April, but you sure as heck can lose it. We've seen that, and I'd like to see the Guardians not get off to a bad start. But again, the best way, they're probably going to be a second half team again. Why are they going to be a second half team? Because they're young, and if their guys develop and grow and gain experience, they get better in the second half. So that means the rotation has to carry the load for the first half of the bullpen, and then you have to hope guys like DeLauter and then Manzardo and the rest of the offense, like Kafis or Valera, has to establish themselves into the second half, or Bazana comes up, or Brito. Those guys have to establish themselves and get better in the second half and grow. You also need a bounce back year from Bo Naylor and Steven Kwan, all those things. So it's going to be hard for this team again to find an identity, I think, offensively, and find the right mix out of spring training to keep guys healthy, to balance the roster, and to figure out who fits the best so they can find the right identity for this team. That's going to be a challenge. And that's going to be the same whether or not they add somebody at this point to the offense. Like, Austin Hayes doesn't change that. Brendan Donovan changes that a little more, because then you push Brito off, you find your second hole hitter, and even though I know everyone's going to say he's left-handed isn't for power, that changes things a little bit, but I'm not holding out hope for Brendan Donovan at this point. Like, literally, I think the last hope is Austin Hayes. And again, that doesn't change it. It just changes whether or not someone like Jones or Rodriguez or Kafis or Valera fits. That's what all it changes. So there's going to be challenges on this team for Vogt on the rotation. There's going to be challenges fighting out the infield, the outfield, service time for DeLauter. He's going to need to get Jose Ramirez some rest because of the World Baseball Classic. And that's the first time he's handling that as a manager. So he's going to have a lot of challenges going into year 3. Again, new things, new coaching staff, figuring out the team identity, figuring out what roster spots need to go to who. It's a lot to figure out. The first 2 years for Vogt were pretty challenging, but it doesn't end there. But he also has done a pretty good job. And despite the expectations the roster gives us, things have turned out okay the last 2 years, at least in terms of making the playoffs. I know we want them to go a little bit further, but you know what? That's the first step. So we'll see what happens. Thank you all for tuning in today. Make sure you are subscribing and follow Locked On Guardians to get the latest episode. I know Jeff's going to be back. We'll have your fix of Guardians talk covered on Friday. I'm sure he's itching to talk draft. And of course, if any other news pops up about the Guardians in the meantime, we'll have a reaction video and some episodes out otherwise as we return to 5 episodes a week, February 2nd. If you never miss an episode, the Everyday Air Club is built for you. Get Locked On Guardians ad-free, members only, Discord access, and more. Head to Locked On Guardians. Think, go, Guardians, go. Think warm thoughts.